Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Of Her Majesty's opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, a man for whom regular listeners to this programme will know I hold no candle. But I do find myself increasingly baffled by the people who are so terrified of him. Maybe there is a fear that he is on the brink of some sort of victory. And I only really worked out last night why this spy story is doing the rounds at all. It's because there's council elections in 10 weeks. As I was sitting there thinking, why are they doing this now? Well, I mean, it's all a load of rubbish. Obviously, the kind of... you know when you see a bird on a wildlife programme bringing worms back to the nest? And this is what half the country is now, isn't it? It's like a little chick with its little beaky wide open, like that. And then the male and the son fly in and just keep dropping. They're not even nourishing worms. They could drop anything down the throat. The gizzard is so wide open. So obviously they're going to feed worms to the gaping beaks of these furiously hard of thinking little chicklets, and it works. So you know, I tap the person next to you at work today and say, "What do you think about Jeremy Corbyn being a spy?" And if they are a furiously hard of thinking little chicklet, they'll go, "I think it's disgusting. I think he's got to go, oh yeah, communist you." If they've got a brain in their head, they'll go, "Oh, for heaven's sake, whatever next are the right-wing media going to try and pin on this fella?" So that's just a breakdown of facts. That's counting. The interesting bit becomes, why now? So I spent... I'm not really up to speed. I'd forgotten there was a World Cup this year. That's how up across my diary I am at the moment. I was thinking, she can't call another snap election. And you sort of think, well, it's this Brexit nonsense that the 60-odd MPs have signed a letter off, which is essentially saying, you know, we've gone all in on a pair of twos, but we can't show our hand yet. So can we put the kids' trust funds on the table as well? Can we put the car keys? Can we put the caravan down in Bognor? Have we got anything left? Can you just get all the money from down the back of the sofa? Can we keep putting that on the table as well? Because I do not want to show my pair of twos, which is up against Jean-Claude Juncker's full house. So is that going to cause an election? Why are they doing it now? Why are they so worried about Jeremy Corbyn now? That they've dug up some absolute hogwash about him being a spy. How do you know it's hogwash? Oh, sorry, I should have said. Privy Councillor, yeah. You get appointed to the Privy Council when you're a member of Her Majesty's opposition. There was a lot of talk about it at the time. All the journalists who haven't mentioned it since the spy story broke were, of course, apoplectic about the fact that he possibly wasn't going to kneel in front of the Queen when he became a Privy Councillor. You become a Privy Councillor in order to be party to security briefings that not at the very, very highest level, I don't imagine. That would be for your eyes only stuff. But the Privy Council security vetting will be pretty rigorous, and Corbyn passed it. So anybody who's anybody within that world is supremely comfortable about the fact that he is... he has no questions to answer whatsoever, but the right-wing journalists, of course, are telling you today that he absolutely has questions to answer and not telling you that he's a Privy Councillor. And when you don't put those dots together and close your beak, that's when you become the little furiously hard-of-thinking chicklet that I described in my introduction. Because now you know, now you've got all the facts you need. He's a Privy Councillor, so he can't be a spook. There can be nothing that has compromised him in the eyes of our security services, unless, of course, our right-wing journalists who haven't mentioned that he's a Privy Councillor are party to security information that the security services are not party to.
The Defence Secretary says Mr Corbyn has, quote, betrayed his country. In what way?
Well, the Defence Secretary's chosen his own words. I mean, the point for me about this debacle
is that we believe... his country?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn, I think, is a grave danger to this country, but that's because
has he betrayed the country?
That's because of the ideas in which he believes and what that would mean for our economy and our society.
People have all sorts of ideas. But your Defence Secretary, our Defence Secretary, the Defence Secretary of this government, of our government, has said the leader of Her Majesty's opposition has betrayed his country. In what way has he betrayed his country?
Well, that really is a question for Gavin Williamson. That's not the word.
So you don't agree with it?
Well, I'm not really commenting on the...
Well, do you think he's betrayed the country?
I think that Jeremy Corbyn is a grave danger to our country.
But that's a political point. That's a different... Of course you do. Everybody in one party thinks the other party is a grave danger. Betrayal is an entirely different matter. That's a serious accusation. I just point out that a senior figure in the Czech Republic Defence Ministry says Sarkozy, who is the former Czech spy, it's his real name, is a liar. That's the exact word. The director of the Czech archives on security says no files show Mr. Corbyn cooperating with Czech intelligence. The German archivists say there are no Stasi files on Mr. Corbyn at all. So I ask again, in what sense has Mr. Corbyn betrayed this country?
Well, Andrew, I'm not going to comment on that. As you've suggested, this is an area where there's lots of questions to answer.
Well,
we've got a free press in this country. The free press is asking the questions. They should be answered.
Yeah, but it's not just the free press. Your fellow Tories are all piling in as a result. Your security minister, again, the key word security minister, he's compared Mr. Corbyn to Kim Philby. Kim Philby was a traitor. At the time, if he'd been found guilty, he would have been hanged. That's an outrageous smear to say of the leader of the opposition.
Well, Andrew, I'm not going to allow you to draw me into potentially libelling anybody, and so I'm not going to comment on that.
So you don't agree with that either? So
Well,
you don't agree with the Defence Minister, you don't agree with the Security Minister?
But this is classic dead cat strategy, isn't it? The government's on the ropes on a whole range of issues, from NHS crisis, children's services are in crisis.
I've got the government on the ropes, and you've just interrupted.
The domestic agenda.
Let me try and keep them on the ropes. A Tory backbencher, MP Ben Bradley, he tweeted that Mr. Corbyn had, quote, sold British secrets to communist spies. Sold British secrets to communist spies. So clearly without evidence that he then had to delete it.
Well, that really is a matter for Ben. But what I would say to you is that we believe in a free press in this country. The questions have been asked. The questions need to be answered.
I'm asking, do you think that Mr. Corbyn can be compared to Kim Philby? Do you think that he has in any way betrayed this country? Do you think he sold British secrets? Do you think any of that?
I've got no evidence for any of that, and so I won't make any...
So why do your colleagues?
Well, that's a matter for them, Andrew.
Surely the real scandal, Mr. Baker, isn't what Mr. Corbyn has supposedly done or not done. It's the outright lies and disinformation that your fellow Tories are spreading. That's the real scandal, isn't it?
I'm not going to accuse my colleagues of lies or disinformation. They will need to defend what they've said.
Well, I would put it to you, it's clearly a lie on any evidence so far available to us that Mr. Corbyn sold British secrets to the communists. Agreed?
I've got no evidence to make a judgment
So to claim so would be a lie?
Well, the question's been asked, the question should be answered, but it's not for me to sit here on your programme inventing evidence and reaching a conclusion myself. It's not something I'm willing to do.
You leave that to your Tory colleagues. Mr. Corbyn just finally said that the British press had gone a bit James Bond in that video. Mr. Corbyn does realise that James Bond was on our side.
Absolutely, yes. But I think the real issue here, Andrew, and you've hit the nail on the head, is that these are fabrications. You know, they are at best made up. At worst, they have been designed to deflect from the crisis the government's in.
Well, I'm going to stop you there because I think you will agree that we've kind of done that.
Well, we have,
all right.
But
Good.
you know, it's an important
so we'll
point
move on.
to make.
And that's why it's been made more than several times.
So we're not going to talk about that. We are, however, going to talk about his response to the accusations, which I think is very interesting. Very interesting. And it marks, just to be self-referential for a tiny nanosecond, I hadn't registered how far I've moved on this issue in the course of the last decade or so. And I had to double-check, because I thought I'd misremembered. The first time I met Alistair Campbell, we were at opposite ends of a television panel, and by the end of it, we were mirroring each other in quite an aggressive way. Our body language, my wife pointed it out because I didn't notice at the time. My body language, there were two people sat in between us, Lindsay Nicholson, who was editor of Good Housekeeping magazine and I think on one of the press watchdogs at the time, and a bloke called Max Clifford, who probably needs no introduction. And if I tell you that it was me and Max Clifford against Alistair Campbell and Lindsay Nicholson, I think, was it? I can't remember where Lindsay Nicholson stood on it, but I was certainly suggesting that to put any measures in place to curtail the activities of Her Majesty's press were disgusting, and Alistair Campbell was arguing that they are a profoundly corrupt institution that really needed to have their wings clipped. And by the end of the debate, it was... I hesitate to say it was an alpha male encounter because, although Alistair deserves that description, I don't. I'm a gamma male. And the imaging, the mirroring, it's called. I crossed my legs, he crossed his. I leant forward on my left elbow to turn to him and start pointing. He leant forward on his right elbow to turn to me and start pointing. And it was funny. I used to enjoy doing those sort of things with competitors of that calibre. But my God, I was wrong. I didn't really understand newspapers then in the way that I have come to since I ceased to be a newspaper journalist. And that's why I found Corbyn's comments about change coming so fascinating. We'll get stuck into that shortly. I just want to... Shall we cross live to the... No, we won't. OK, 10 minutes after 10 is the time. I was told that we were going to. My apologies. So you have this... situation now where Jeremy Corbyn, in response to an absolute pyramid of piffle, 2 words, anyone talking about Jeremy Corbyn and a Czech spy who was buttering him up while simultaneously organising Live Aid, just say Privy Councillor and they have to be quiet. That's all. Just say Privy Council. Privy Council. OK? But his response to it is fascinating. I should warn you in advance that this is a contender for the worst Jackanory ever.
In the last few days, the Sun, the Mail, the Telegraph, the Express have all gone a little bit James Bond. They've found a former Czechoslovakian spy whose claims are increasingly wild and entirely false. He seems to believe I kept him informed about what Margaret Thatcher had for breakfast and says he was responsible for either Live Aid or the Mandela concert, or maybe both. It's easy to laugh, but something more serious is happening. Publishing these ridiculous smears that have been refuted by Czech officials shows just how worried the media bosses are by the prospect of a Labour government. They're right to be. Labour will stand up to the powerful and corrupt and take the side of the many, not the few. A free press is essential for democracy, and we don't want to close it down, we want to open it up. At the moment, much of our press isn't very free at all. In fact, it's controlled by billionaire tax exiles who are determined to dodge paying their fair share for our vital public services. The general election showed the media barons are losing their influence, and social media means their bad old habits are becoming less and less relevant. But instead of learning these lessons, they're continuing to resort to lies and smears. Their readers, you, all of us, deserve so much better. Well, we've got news for them. Change is coming.
I would have added a at that point and put my little finger just on the edge of my mouth like that, a bit like Dr. Evil in the film. So please don't bombard me with criticism for not finding Jeremy Corbyn very compelling or convincing or impressive. I can't help it. I'm on a journey. We're all on a journey. But talk to me about that last bit there, change is coming, because he didn't say anything inaccurate about newspapers there. And that's why they hate him so much. You've got your own reasons for being unimpressed by Jeremy Corbyn or for being impressed by him, but let's all look at this from the outside, OK? Let's step back from any political affiliation whatsoever, any political opinion of Jeremy Corbyn whatsoever, and look solely and exclusively about what he's saying about newspapers. Because I can tell you now that if you are more interested in what was said in public over a cup of tea in the House of Commons between Jeremy Corbyn and an alleged spy discredited by his own side several decades ago, if you're more interested in that than you are in the private dinners with no minutes and no public pronouncements undertaken by the editors of national newspapers like the Daily Mail and David Davis, who returned early from negotiations in Brussels to have a dinner with the editor of the Daily Mail, and Theresa May, who's also been having secret dinners, private dinners. By secret, I mean the contents are not known. I don't mean that the existence of the dinner has been denied. I just mean you don't know what went on there. I don't know what went on there. All of these right-wing journalists talking to you today about democracy and accountability and transparency, you get them on the phone for me now, will you? Let me talk to the editor of The Sun. Get me the editor of these right-wing newspapers. I'd love to know what they talk to the Prime Minister about. Because that's not a free press. That is an incredibly powerful cabal of incredibly unaccountable people exercising incredible power over a very weak Prime Minister. That's not a free press. These people who are bleating today about how government should not have any influence over the media are actually bleating about the possibility of the media having less influence over the government. It's a crucial distinction. I just wish I was making this point on behalf of someone other than Comrade Corbyn. Don't. I can't help it. So there's the thing. And how can you look at the vista of the British print media in particular and conclude anything other than what Jeremy Corbyn has said? What are they so scared of? You see, this is the argument that I was having with Alistair Campbell all those years ago when I said, look, if it's not true, the newspapers will get punished. They have to be free to do whatever they do. If you don't want to get reported, I sat next to Max Mosley once on another television programme. I think it was Question Time. And he'd been done for his for the orgy that the News of the World published about him. They made various allegations and connotations that weren't true, which is why it was a successful legal case on his part. But the central event had occurred. And I turned to him. Well, I haven't been rendered speechless on live television very often, but I turned to Max Mosley and I said something like, in my very pompous, holier-than-thou way, I said, well, if you don't want to embarrass your family by having details of the orgy you attended published in a national newspaper, my advice to you would be to not attend orgies. And it was such a sort of calm and urbane man. There's a pause. I got the, requisite round of laughter from the audience. It dies down. I have to stress it was a tiny round of laughter compared to the one that followed what Max Mosley said to me. He just said, well, I didn't ask you to join in. He may even have added an old boy. I don't think he did, but I'll add it for the benefit of the tape. Well, I didn't ask you to join in. Where'd you come back from that? I don't know. But the point was, back then, I believed passionately, because it was not in my blood necessarily, but very much part of who I wanted to be as a grown-up, that newspapers were a force for good. And I don't anymore. That doesn't mean I'm right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong. I look at, and I know these people now, and I know how it works, and I know I would have been one of them if my career had gone down a different path. I would have been furiously defending the editor of whatever newspaper I worked for. I would have been a little bit blind. Blindly loyal is the phrase I would use. I know my weaknesses. I know my flaws. And I know that if someone else started having a pop at us, I'd have been up and fighting. It's like family almost when you work in print media. But I'm not in it. And I don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is that it is pouring poison into the bloodstream of the nation. And that is why I wonder whether you think, even though you hold Jeremy Corbyn in very low regard, whether you think he's got a point when it comes to the press, where we are not, because I can't, I sometimes wish I could conjure up the level of cynicism and dishonesty that would be needed to pretend that a story like the one about Jeremy Corbyn and a Czech spy has anything in it at all. But I'm not. I don't get phone calls from Conservative HQ telling me what to write about or talk about. I don't get little steers saying, can you just do us a favour, can you throw them a bone on this one? Can you just sort of help us inflate this particular balloon? I can't, because there's a pin called the Privy Council that should pop this balloon for anyone with a functioning intellect and conscience. And that's the problem, isn't it? That's why I think he has got a point, Jeremy Corbyn, about newspapers. But I'm so neck deep in this world. My dad was a newspaper man. I dreamt of being nothing else. I don't know if my vision is clear, so I want to know what you can see. Kevin's in Carnarvon in North Wales. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
First time corner.
You're very welcome.
Thanks very much. Just like to say that I support wholeheartedly your stance on what is predominantly a right-wing press. And I think that
there's nothing wrong with right-wing. We need a better word, don't we?
Okay, we do. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. But you know what I mean.
Dishonest.
Yes. They are actually peddling lies, basically, on a daily basis to people. But, I got to just take this as being the actual, this is news according to them.
Yeah.
The point I wanted to make was that it's the only person I can see who actually is willing to put his head above the parapet. I know you're doing it, but as a politician, is Mr. Corbyn.
Very bit part player. Well, Ed Miliband sort of flirted with it very, very briefly, but this is the first time I can remember a leader of a political party taking Murdoch and the rest of them and just saying, sorry, lad. I mean, it might backfire horribly, but he is saying, sorry, fellas, I'm not dancing to your tune, and I never will. And they don't know quite how to respond to that.
Well, I think that this is where if they're like slightly gobsmacked, because they're not expecting this to happen. I mean, Blair didn't do it. Blair, in fact, got into bed with these very characters because he saw it as a way of...
Well, he had to. He would not. He couldn't have won an election in '97 or afterwards without the support of these people. And that, of course, is why many of the Corbynite left look upon Tony Blair. One of the reasons why they look upon him with such disgust.
Well, that certainly is an opinion, and I've got some sympathy with that for sure. And I really think that it is time. And I'm so pleased that somebody like you is actually...
Well, I don't want to talk about me. I mean, people ring up to slag me off, and I don't want to I'm not the subject. I'm talking about the newspaper. So if you had to point at something that they do that they should somehow be prevented from doing, because I don't like the idea of government interfering in media, but there is now a middle ground here, and I'm going to try and map it today. What do you think they should be prevented from doing?
Well, I mean, if you look at the kind of stories which people, newspapers like The Sun and the Mail have pushed over the last 2 years. I mean, the scandal with phone tapping and so on.
That's it, isn't it? And this is the suggestion that Corbyn wants Leveson 2, which was kind of agreed by everybody. And don't forget, it's not that long ago that David Cameron had a director of communications who turned out to be so involved in newspaper corruption that he ended up in jail. So he waltzed into number 10, presumably with a security pass. And we seem to have all forgotten that. And the reason why we've all forgotten it is because of the gaslighting undertaken every day by chiefly the Daily Mail and, of course, The Sun, but increasingly the Telegraph, and occasionally for comic relief, the Daily Express gets stuck in. Kevin, thank you. I'm not being prissy when I say let's not talk about me. Regular listeners to the programme will know that I enjoy very little more than talking about myself, but not on these issues. This is bigger, and it's Corbyn versus the media. Who are you going to put your money on? Because I have to tell you, despite the fact that I think on this issue Corbyn is on the side of the Angels, if you forced me to put my life savings on who's going to come out on top in this battle, I still think I'd back the Mail and the Sun. 0345 6060 973. But I don't have a very sophisticated understanding of modern media. I'm still quite old, quite trad. John's in Reading. John, what's going on?
You all right, James? How you doing, mate?
All good.
I don't think we're going to get along on this conversation.
It's all right. There's plenty of room for that.
Okay, right. So I tried to get on this conversation yesterday with you and I never got through. I believe this is the conversation we could have been having if Jeremy Corbyn was murdered. So, for example, I'll take a key example. That bloke the other day who drove into London to drive into a group of Asian men and women and children.
Darren Osborne, who drove into the Finsbury Park Mosque.
He drove in there and he had an idea of basically going to the Palestinian march to kill Jeremy Corbyn. Now, I'm going on a long stretch here, but you'll need to stay on this. I believe these newspapers are doing this on the purpose now to get the opposition leader murdered.
Right, well, you sound a little bit mad, mate. You know that.
I know I don't sound bad, but let's take this for example. Some of the newspapers have come out reach. So Jihad, Jezzy, David Cameron.
Listen, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just going to tell you that I find what these newspapers do to be disgusting and despicable and the worst kind of demagoguery. But I also have to tell you that I have friends and former colleagues who operate at almost the very highest echelons of these organisations. And with some of them, we've agreed only to talk about football and PlayStation and country walks when we spend time together. And with some of them, we have ding-dongs. And I can swear to you by all that I hold holy that nowhere in those editorial processes is... What are you doing while I'm sharing with these pearls of wisdom with you?
I was just moving the ladder.
Get out. Jog on, John. I'm not having ladders moved while I'm doing one of my pompous monologues. For heaven's sake, mate. What do you think I'm here for? Your entertainment? I'm here for my own.
Let me give you 2 key points, mate.
Yeah, all right, you do that. I'm just going to go and get some paint.
So, two important tweets. David Cameron's a really good example.
Yes.
So David Cameron said that he's a threat to your family. Now, if you had someone...
No, we're not. We're arguing about 2 different things. They absolutely employ the most potent leverage of media that media can enjoy. They do disgusting things, and they don't put their own name on it. They pay columnists fortunes. You will never get close to the editors of these newspapers, ever, 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 ever. They can print what they like about you. You can ask for an interview on your, even if you've got the privilege of a radio programme like this, and they'll never come near you. But I promise you...
Jeremy Corbyn would be front first page. So would you reckon Jeremy Corbyn was murdered in the newspapers on the Daily Mail, would be front page, would be 6th page?
No, of course it would be the front page, John. This is how I know that you're barking up the wrong tree. There's no way that they're sitting there... well, all right, OK, so you think...
I know not to about your mates, because they're working hard, and they're on the highest options, but they're not the directors of these newspapers.
Yes, but I'm telling you now, they are not sitting there dreaming of Jeremy Corbyn being assassinated. You may have a point when we do questions after terrorist attacks about who radicalised them. I would put some journalists, and certainly some editors, on the list of the men who radicalised Darren Osborne, absolutely. But it's the propaganda that has radicalised him. It was not the dream of these journalists to see a van driven into a mosque or to see Joe Cox assassinated. I think there were probably some people in public life who do have blood on their hands for that, but it's not in the sense that you describe, because it's not deliberate. They're not like a mad mullah standing up and telling people to go out and blow themselves up. And I'm not... Go on.
Explain the Daily Mail story with a big vampire of Jeremy Corbyn and saying...
Yeah, no, we're doing it again. We're doing it again. That is cheap and pathetic and extreme, but it's not incitement to murder. I'm going to park it there, mate, because there's a lonely ladder just a few feet behind you. It's the massive difference. Incitement to murder is a demonstrable crime, which is legislated for. But I'll always listen, I promise. I'll always take all of these conversations, all of these contributions, and although sometimes, you know, I will reserve the right to say, look, I do know this world a bit better than you do, I will never dismiss completely the suggestion that things are even worse than I believe. I'll read this, because I think it might be a bit close to the bone, and I don't like the subtext. OK, James writes, Ral, because some of your mates are newspaper editors, the tabloids are not inciting hatred and violence with their traitors, quislings and Comrade Corbyn headlines. Is it really so far away from inciting murderous outcomes? Yeah, it really is, because you just have to believe, that they want murderous outcomes, and they just don't. It's a game for these people. It's a game for people in this line of work. What can I say about, I don't know, women's hairstyles that's going to provoke some sort of race war? Anything at all. It doesn't mean that they're racist. It just means they know you'll get provoked. It's really simple stuff. But yeah, I do appreciate that things are moving to a much uglier place than we've seen in years. Let's just take a brief pause to cross live to the Supreme Court, where LBC's Lucy Hough is keeping tracks of the latest case involving the so-called black cab rapist John Warboys. Lucy, what's happened this morning?
Well, James, this is an appeal brought by the Metropolitan Police, and it's now been ruled against them by the Supreme Court, the third time they've lost this case. It was brought by two victims of John Warboys, the cab rape investigation, and the Met Police appealed that, and that's now been unanimously dismissed by the Supreme Court this morning. It all began in 2003 with these two victims. The first who claimed she was raped that year, 2003, and the second in 2007. They reported to police they'd been raped, and the police then did very little. It wasn't until 2008 that Warboys was eventually arrested, and he was identified as the perpetrator in both cases. So for one of the victims, it was 6 years between the date she was raped by Warboys and when he was caught. And in the other case from 2006, the investigation was dropped, even though Warboys was seen with the victim on CCTV. It was in court today. She must remain anonymous, but she said she was relieved.
Obviously, I'm a bit speechless at the moment. It's not really sunk in, because it's a bit of an emotional day. 15 years. So, when they finally got to start doing their job, and that's what I wanted to say to the police. You had the procedures in place, you had everything there. Start doing your job, stop fighting, using public money to fight something like this, and get on with your job. Because had you done your job properly, there wouldn't be 105 victims. There would have been one. And I can take the one, I can't take the 105. And that's all I can say at the moment.
So powerful words there from one of the victims about the way that the police investigate sexual violence like this. And these women had already won their case at the High Court and the Appeal Court and been awarded £40,000 in compensation between them. The court found that they were liable under the Human Rights Act, the police, for a failure to investigate, which amounted to inhumane or degrading treatment to these victims. And the police say that while they should have proper investigative structures, they can't be liable for crimes committed by other people. But it's thought that this verdict could open the floodgates over compensation claims for serious crime investigations like this one.
Lucy Hoffmanny, thanks indeed. Human Rights Act there coming to the rescue of humans who had arguably been rather badly let down by the authorities. Yeah, again, I guess that leads us back to the conversation we're having about so-called right-wing newspapers, doesn't it? Because in their world, the Human Rights Act is an absolute catalogue of catastrophe. 10:39 is the time. I would remind you that Warboys is back in court, or at least his case is back in court next month, back in the High Court, when there is a hearing into the Parole Board's decision to release him. And that will no doubt demand our attention as well. Before that, later on the programme, I'm going to look at why this KFC story is a lot less funny than it first appeared, and also another tale involving... I think it's just the worst thing. Very rarely, I think, you can do an Andrea Leadsom and say, as a parent. Because, as a parent, these stories of children who are on life support and who doctors feel are never going to recover just tears your heart out, more than anything else, doesn't it? And there is another case before the courts, which we will examine later. But before that, I just want you to talk to me about newspapers, because I'm a bit of an idiot. And I've oscillated wildly over the course of my life from thinking that newspapers were the be-all and end-all, all I ever wanted to be. And then even as recently as 2011, I'd be having a set 2 on the telly with Alistair Campbell when he was saying we need to have more control, or there need to be more regulation. You can't let newspapers carry on doing this sort of thing and that sort of thing. You know, I think I may even, before the Millie Dowler revelation emerged, I may even have been making a case for phone hacking on the, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, altar that sundry idiots through the ages have reached for whenever presented with evidence of state interference in there. Well, you've got nothing to hide. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I used to say that. But now I look at the landscape of modern Britain, I look at the damage that we're doing to ourselves willingly, the number of people who look at the editorial slant of a paper like the Mail or the Sun and put it down in order to free up their hands to smash themselves in the face several times and then start slapping their children around because, oh, I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn had a cup of tea with a Czech spy and our bananas are bendy. And I don't know whether there is a sinister cabal meeting regularly to discuss how they can continue to protect their own corrupt fortunes while persuading the rest of us to fight with each other. Look what's happening in America now. I said to you about a year ago, I said, when they can't blame Muslims and they can't blame immigrants and they can't blame black people and they can't blame lovies and they can't blame lefties and they can't blame liberals, where are they going to go next? Where will they direct their hate next? Just have a cursory glance at the American media this morning, particularly the kind of pseudo journalists on those alt-right websites like Breitbart and InfoWars, and they're now blaming the children whose classmates got killed in Florida. They are now the target for right-wing media-led hate. Fox News, part of that list. They're turning on the children, accusing them of being shills, of being schooled, of being sort of FBI apologists. The children whose classmates have not all been buried yet. And the right-wing media, the hate mongers, and we've got our own version here, so you know I'm not exaggerating because I told you this would happen. Where does it go next? Always ask yourself that as you feel the bile rise within you and you spit it out at Sadiq Khan or at Lily Allen or at whoever it is this week, Jeremy Corbyn. There it goes, that bile, there it goes. Where will it go next? And that's why I think Corbyn's got a point about newspapers, 10:42, but it breaks my heart to say it. Marcia's in Harlesden. Marcia, what would you like to say?
Hi, the point I wanted to make was just that the best thing we can do, it's not necessarily about legislation, it's about just not buying newspapers.
But you can't. It's like a fix. It's like a fix, isn't it? You need, it's like the dopamine hit you get when someone likes your social media stuff. It's like the negative of that. It's the other side of the same coin. Nicky Campbell used to go up to people when he saw them reading the Mail and tap them on the shoulder and say, "Are you angry yet?" That's why you buy it. People like being angry. It's one of the great discoveries of my years in this job. People hate you when you give them reasons not to be angry.
But I think, unfortunately, what's happening is that because less and less people are buying these papers, what's happening is they're being amplified by other media. So you guys, you look at the headlines, you then report on those headlines. You know, nobody, but, you know, I don't know anyone who buys these papers. And yet, you know, thousands of people are reached every day on the news because you news guys keep on carrying these headlines.
But say that last bit again.
Okay, so because the news agenda is set by newspapers that a lot of people are no longer buying, you're basically amplifying the voice of the, you know...
Oh, you see, this is the argument I had with Beth this morning. I said, with the producer, I said, do we talk about this? Because if we do, that's why we're not actually talking about the spy nonsense, you see. We're talking about what Jeremy Corbyn said about newspapers. So I'm going to defend myself from the accusation that I've allowed the agenda to be set by them, but I can only defend myself halfway, can't I?
I mean, you know, as I said, I think... Look at the falling circulations. Look at
Look at what Centre Parts. You see what Centre Parts did at the weekend after one of the Mail columnists published a profoundly homophobic column about Tom Daley's imminent parenthood, and Centre Parts have pulled their advertising. Which I mean, if I sell a kidney anytime soon, I'll be popping back to Centre Parts in a jiffy. That works.
We don't. I mean, we don't trust the papers, just like we don't.
But they do. You don't. They do. You don't. They do. You say you don't know anyone who reads them. I don't know anyone who doesn't. In a way, and when I go into my social media, I go into my Twitter, or even occasionally when I gird my loins and have a little glimpse in the box of trolls. Please notice me, James. Please notice. They just suck it all up. They suck it all up. This Jeremy Corbyn is a smart. Yeah, must be. And we now know why, remember. This is the silver lining to Brendan Cox's despicable behaviour, is it's allowed us to work out why people on that side of the fence think that the way that they do. Woke up on Monday morning to countless messages saying, you'll be sticking up for your mate Brendan Cox. He's not my mate. I've met him twice. Enormous sympathy for what he went through. Enormous disgust at what he's been accused of and what he's confessed to. But I sat there thinking, why would anyone think I'd defend him? I suddenly realised they think we're like they are. So they think we're the same. They think, oh, he's one of yours, so you don't care if he's a sex offender, just like I don't care about Donald Trump being accused of rape by one of his own wives, because I like what he says about racism. And it all comes down to that. Jeremy Corbyn, don't like what he says about racism. Theresa May, fantastic support and sucker to racists up and down the land. It all comes down to this so-called identity politics. But with the newspapers, I don't know. I don't know that I could come to work every day unless they were setting some sort of agenda. Where would I start? What would we be talking about now, Marcia, briefly?
Well, I think perhaps, you know, look on social media. I mean, I don't know where you'd start, but, you know, perhaps a bit of investigative journalism might be good.
I guess so. But also, I mean, you know, we want to have humdingers and chats and rows and squabbles and arguments. I'm going to put you through to Beth now, and you can explain to her why I was right and she was wrong earlier. It's 10:46. It's about consistency, isn't it? And again, this is why the Brendan Cox thing is so fascinating to me. All you want as a decent person is that everybody plays by the same rules. And I hesitate to break this down on left-right. In fact, I refuse to break this down on right-left, left-right territories, because I think there are plenty of people on the left who think that they should be allowed to live by different rules from people on the right. I would worry about some elements of Jeremy Corbyn's core support having any influence or control whatsoever over the media. But I just would imagine it would be possible to put some sort of independent regulator in place. But everyone has to play by the same rules. So if you're really that spooked by Jeremy Corbyn having a cup of tea in public with a spy who subsequently claimed to have invented Live Aid, genuinely worried about it, why aren't you worried about the concerns raised by MI6 this week about a Russian oligarch with very, very close links to Vladimir Putin and military hardware production, raising about £1 billion on the London Stock Exchange? Why aren't you spooked about the fact that Conservative Party dinners routinely offer tennis matches and dinners with senior Conservative politicians that can only be afforded by Russians living here with money most charitably described as of dubious sources? George Osborne, discussions, this is a few years ago, isn't it, back in 2008, £50,000 donation discussed with Russia's richest oligarch. Allegations that he was personally involved. Same bloke, Oleg Deripaska. Same bloke. conservative links. How can you be concerned about an obscure bearded backbencher having a cup of tea in the House of Commons with a fantasist and not concerned about people with their hands on the actual wheel being in contact today with people with very suspect CVs? And equally, how can you be concerned about what Jeremy Corbyn said over a cup of tea 30 or 40 years ago and not concerned about the fact that David Davis quit Brexit negotiations early to come back to Britain to dine with a newspaper editor? None of which you will ever find out about, the contents of those conversations, the details of those conversations. So that's my big mission for 2018. Same rules for everyone. And that is probably the definition of naivety. And that's what people mean when they say liberal or lefty or lovey. They mean people who think everyone should live by the same rules. And the big breakthrough this week on the Brendan Cox story is that the other lot don't. I'm not going to call them right-wing, but the other lot don't. They think their men should get a free pass on stuff like sexual assault or rape or whatever it may be because they're on their team. It's why the left can look so weak historically, because it puts its hands up, it says sorry, it moves on, it compromises, it tries to change. And if you're an authoritarian, usually racist, that looks like weakness, or at least you can tell your sheeple that that is weakness when it's the opposite. And I do think the newspapers now have pushed us to a point where this is beginning to become some sort of national catastrophe. Richard's in Bristol. Richard, what would you like to say?
God, I'm exasperated, but I'm glad I finally got through to you, James.
Good. What am I due now? A pat on the back or a kick in the ghoulies?
No, it's just waiting to get through to you. Actually,
carry on. Oh well, I can't take a go.
Okay, listen, I'm going to put it out straight away. I am not a Corbyn fan.
No.
For some reason, I just cannot take the bloke in any form or any context, but I do agree with a lot of what he says.
That is weird, isn't it? There's a lot of people in that position. It's a question of integrity and sincerity, then. You just don't quite believe him or trust him.
I look at him, and I'm not a shallow person, far from it. I'm a person who never judges a book by its cover. But with Corbyn, I just can't deal with the guy, and I don't know why. Even though I agree with some of his policies and what he said yesterday, the way he put it was great. What I think, though, that the press have already imploded on themselves, because I think now the general public, who is reasonable, know that it's just lies. For the right wing, who wants to be, like what you said, be haters and like being filled with hate, that's never going to change. But the thing
why is that? Is it were people born like that? This is one of the things that I'm working on in my new book, which I'm going to keep mentioning regularly as a sort of reminder to myself to actually get on with writing it. Is this because I refuse to be dissuaded from the position that people actively prefer to be angry and ignorant, because, you know, I've dedicated my life to giving them reasons to be less angry and less ignorant, and a certain type of person despises you for it. And so what do you get out of that? Is it that... go on. This is chapter 4, by the way.
You've said this before.
Go on.
Some people take pleasure out of seeing other people being angry, being downtrodden. Some people, they get through their day by venting hate within themselves. By reading the paper, closeting themselves, they get through the day. You will not comprehend that because your makeup is not like that.
But I don't believe theirs is either. I think something awful's happened to them to make them like this.
I don't believe anything's awful. I think what you can say, over decades, people drip feeding, people who are...
But why would you wake up in the morning? You remember I took a call a couple of months ago from a lad that used to be in the EDL, and he just sounded so happy that he'd managed to sort of see what a load of hate he'd been immersing himself. We're going off on a bit of a tangent, aren't we? But the newspapers obviously are feeding these appetites in a way that I think is worse than it's ever been. I look at Joe Cox and I look at Darren Osborne, and I don't think that either of those crimes, that victim or that criminal, would have occurred without the newspaper climate in this country. And that's a bridge I'm prepared to fight on.
No, I totally agree with you. But the thing is now, James, as you said, the people who buy these papers now, they know that it's not true. But for whatever it is, it feeds their...
do you think so? Because I know some of these men. I don't see them as much as I used to socially, but I used to be mates with some of the big names on this side of journalism, and they must know what a Privy Councillor is. They must know that Jeremy Corbyn has been vetted to his back teeth before being allowed to become a Privy Councillor. They must know that the German authorities have already said on Tuesday night there's no Stasi file, and yet they're writing articles for today's newspaper saying, why won't he release his Stasi file? There isn't one. They've told us that there isn't, so they must... I don't know that I'm ready yet to call them corrupt. I just think they're a little bit confused.
But James, when you say that you have mates, yeah, we all have mates, but mates will tell you sometimes what they would like you to hear.
Well, not
they
mine.
Don't really want to tell you. Well, you know, as you said, there's always another side to a person that nobody knows, no matter how much you think they know them. And as I said to you before, I think the press has imploded because this generation, last 2 generations now, they can find information, they can weigh up logics against the newspaper, where a time before they couldn't. So the newspapers now are basically, they don't really care.
I love you. I love you. No, I love you because I'm about to tweak your nose.
Go on, man.
Because you've just given a really clever analysis of the media in the context of Jeremy Corbyn's electoral appeal. But you began, as Nick Gillard has just pointed out in a tweet. I'll read you what he wrote. Current caller can't see the connection between years of Corbyn bashing in the media and the fact that he doesn't like him.
No, but I don't like him as a person.
God, you don't know him as a person!
No, I know. That's the problem, I say.
Don't be tricky-dicky, Richard. Don't be tricky-dicky.
I put it out there straight away because I said I feel really bad because I don't judge people, you know?
Except in his case, you're prepared to make an exception.
Well, I try really hard.
I'm tweaking your nose because I suspect I'm much closer to you on this one than I would actually be comfortable admitting. I do think I perhaps have been groomed by the British media into refusing to give Jeremy Corbyn an even break. But then he does have a lot... Well, then again, and this isn't me being pathetic, I would love the opportunity to get to know him better. But then again, I did touch him inappropriately at the Daily Mirror Pride of Britain Awards, and I'm not sure that put my interview request any further up the list.